So, steel types. After my last video, there were lots of people asking, how do we know what steel we might want our knife to be made out of? And I completely sympathize, because until I got into knives, I didn't realize fully the extent of different steels that there were. And I come from an engineering background where I've been educated about different types of steel and their property to a certain extent. But in the knife world, it's mind-blowing and mind-boggling as to what's good, what's not, and how that can even change with the heat treatment that you do to it. And that's not just a one-option thing either. There's millions of factors that can all be variants to tell you whether that knife is going to be good for one thing or another. Which is another point. Knife types and knife suitability for a job, again, can be very specific. So anyway, let's break it down, and I'm going to do this completely off the top of my head, so sorry if I ramble a little bit. But obviously there are two primary types of steel, so far as knives are concerned. There's stainless steel and there is non-stainless steel, which is also referred to as high carbon steel. Now, both of these can make great knives. The main obvious difference is stainless steels stain less. The clue's in the name, and by stain we basically mean rusting and corrosion, which can be caused by it obviously getting wet. If you use it at the seaside when you're sea fishing and you put it away in your bag and all wet, covered in salty water, where salt exacerbates the speed of corrosion, obviously a stainless steel knife isn't going to rust instantly, whereas a high carbon steel knife will probably start rusting within 10 minutes. Now, again, the difference between a stainless steel and a high carbon stainless steel, or high carbon steel, is a linear progression. There are also semi-stainless steels that land in between that, and the thing that dictates whether something is stainless or not is the level of chromium that is in that steel when they make it. Now, again, with steels, they're all made to different recipes. You get stainless steels that have got 12% chromium. You get them that have got 14, probably 16, 18, and they're going to be progressively more corrosion resistant. If you get one that's 11.5, which is what D2 steel is, it's kind of marginal. You know, you've got to be aware that that steel can rust. In fact, even full stainless steels can rust. I used to work for a company that made industrial dishwashing machines. And you know what? If you take a Brillo pad that's not stainless steel, leave it in the bottom of a dishwashing machine that's made of stainless steel, one will affect the other and cause it to rust. Who knew? But I do now. Now you do. So all these things require a little bit of maintenance and care, including stainless steels. Now, that is an overriding factor for some people. I've always been of the ilk that if I have a knife, I don't want it to rust. But I would always go with the stainless steel option. However, from now that I've got the perspective as the person making the knives, there's a big difference between the performance you'll get from the stainless steel to a high carbon steel for the price that it costs to process that knife. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. High carbon steel is much cheaper to buy, it's much cheaper to heat treat, and it will rust. So if you want a high performance knife that is going to hold a really keen edge and also be easier to sharpen, then high carbon steel will be better. On the other side, stainless steels in a nutshell are more expensive to buy. If you want one that's going to hold an edge as well as a comparable carbon steel, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to cost a heck of a lot more in order to heat treat that knife, and it's also going to use a lot more abrasives in order to then grind that into a shape of a knife. So, but you do then have the added benefit that it isn't going to rust when you look away for 5 minutes. So these are the trade-offs that you have to make. And to put that in a little bit more context on all fronts at the same time, let's go back to high carbon steel knives. If you want a nice knife that's going to perform really, really well, for example, a skinning knife, a high carbon steel will very easily reach 60 Rockwell, several of them a little bit more, but 60 Rockwell hardness is ideal that most people tend to use. On a high carbon steel blade, for example, 01 tool steel or AT CRV2 or something like that, that's going to be a very keen edge knife. It will be easy to sharpen with minimal tools. You'll be able to sharpen on like a Waterstone, for example, or even sandpaper, or even like one of those little diamond honing sticks that you'd see a chef use, for example. However, that knife, if you get it wet when you're out in the field and put it back in a damp sheath, within a day it's going to have corrosion on it. And seriously, if you leave it wet for a week, then it's going to have holes in it. And that surface is never going to be back to what it used to be. So it's fantastic for a really good functioning knife, but without the added cost of stainless steel. But again, chef knives, they're very popular in high carbon steel. And this is an interesting area where everyone should be aware before choosing. You can get chef knives, that will easily quench to 60 and above Rockwell. You can get 64 hardness, which is very high performance. It's going to hold a really keen edge, and again, it will sharpen easily. However, because it is high carbon steel and you're in a kitchen, when you wash your knife, you're going to have to be very particular. You're going to have to keep it oiled every day that you use it. You're going to have to make sure that it's clean, dry, and oiled before you put it away. Or again, you're going to pull it out the drawer the next day and it's going to be covered with a thin layer of effectively rust. It won't start causing massive craters and be looking like a flaky old car, but it'll definitely be there and it'll be noticeable. So you've got to be of the mindset that if you have high carbon steel, you need to be a little bit prudent in looking after your knife. And even if you don't use it and you just put it away in a cupboard, then you need to think, I probably need to get that knife out to keep it in a pristine condition, ideally once a month, in order to give it a wipe down, a clean, wipe all the old oil off and refresh it with some nice new oil. And that will stay looking beautiful forever. The other thing where chef knives are concerned is high carbon steel knives will effectively take a natural patina, so they'll change color. And here's one that I actually soaked in some vinegar. So this blade's been pickled in vinegar, and again, you might be able to pick up, there's some tiny bits of corrosion where it's just been sat around in my workshop waiting to be finished. But you'll end up with a grey sort of finish as opposed to a bright sort of finish on your knife developing naturally. And if you cut into acidic foods, for example, if you're going to go and slice some onions, don't be surprised if they start to turn your blade a different colour. And also don't be surprised if your blade starts to turn your onions a different colour. So you can end up with grey and black things coming off on your food, which I don't know whether it's health and safety aspect or not, but people do it in professional kitchens. But if you Google it on the internet, you'll find 1,000 arguments. Some say a high carbon steel knife should never be in a kitchen, and you'll find 1,000 people saying that that's just how it should be, and high carbon steel is great, and they won't hear anything else. So I need a cup of tea. Right, moving onwards. Is there any more to say about high carbon steel knives? They will rust, you need to clean them, you need to dry them, etc. On the other hand, stainless steels. Like I was saying, the performance of stainless steel these days is very good, but you pay for that good steel. If you just buy a generic stainless steel knife that doesn't say what it is on it, chances are it's not very good. And to give you an example of the sort of things that add to that price is stainless steel. When you process it, you need to basically wrap it up in a metal film, which is an example. It's basically some very fancy stainless steel foil. Now the reason for that is, in order to process a high carbon steel knife, most of those only require going in the furnace up to about 800 degrees centigrade, whereas stainless steels are all pretty much above 1000 degrees centigrade. And that is because in order to make the steel stainless, obviously they've got all that chromium in there and many other things. All those alloys require higher temperatures in order to bond together at a molecular level. And because of that, when they go up to those high temperatures, you have to protect the blade from the environment it's in. So you have to make sure that it's wrapped up in this foil, which is not insignificant, but it costs about 15 quid per running meter at this size. So again, instantly there's another 5 quid a knife that you've lost on the cost end of it. You know, it's pretty significant. So that instantly makes stainless steel knives more expensive on the front of it, when the actual steel itself is probably 4 times the price of a high carbon steel knife. So, moving onwards. The other thing that is a big factor with stainless steel is it costs more to shape it. And that is because all those different materials in there, chromium things, are extremely hard, and they develop carbides that are, again, extremely hard. And the abrasive belts that I used to grind with are not cheap. So you can't see, it's off camera here, but I've literally got hundreds of them hanging up, and these all run between 8 to 14 pound per belt, and you can easily destroy 1 or 2 belts if you're grinding very hard steels. So again, it's another factor, whereas some of the high carbon steels grind a lot easier. You can do several knives per belt. So all these things have added cost built into them, which is why when you're choosing your knife, if you wanted a cheap high performance knife, high carbon steel is probably the way, but you're going to have to look after it. If you want a very high performance knife from stainless steel, it is going to cost a little bit more, but you're not going to have to worry about it changing by itself over time and rusting. So whilst on the topic of different steels, the other big one is Damascus. And the number of people that come to me and send me an email and say, here's a picture of a Damascus knife, how much for something like this? And I look at it and I know instantly that that knife is probably already being sold for way less than what I could even buy a piece of steel for to make a knife. And the difference is not all Damascus is the same, and in fact very little of it is actually traditionally Damascus. A lot of people love it, and I can see why, because it comes in, you know, numerous beautiful patterns, etc., and it makes for a nice intriguing looking knife. However, probably 80% of what Damascus people have ever seen probably comes from Pakistan or India, and it has literally been made out of bits of scrap metal that have been forged welded together to look like a knife. Again, it obviously is a really hot topic amongst other knife makers, because people will, I get contacted at least 3 times a week from people in other countries that message me saying, here's 1,000 pictures of a load of really crap knives that I've made, buy them off me for this great price. And I ask them, sometimes I play along and I ask them questions, you know, oh, what steel is this made from? And sure enough, they come out and tell me it's made from this, that and the other, and you think, wow, that's great, but you know, I know in reality those steels ain't going to forge weld together and that knife certainly isn't made of them, regardless of what you're trying to sell me. And it's a big issue. If people want to go and get a nice Damascus knife, you know, you got a couple of options. You can either buy a Damascus knife that, you know, is going to cost you a few quid, like any cheap knife you can go out and buy for cheap money. But for a handmade one with decent quality Damascus that's going to give you performance, then it's expensive, very expensive. And this is one of those things where I've kind of drawn a line in the sand for myself, that I only intend to make knives from decent, high quality steels. Effectively, I have no interest in going out there and buying some cheaper steel, making a knife out of it, selling it for a couple of quid less, or making a couple of quid more on each knife, and then having people not be happy with them. Because at the end of the day, we all know you can go buy any chef knife you want from IKEA or the pound shop for literally peanuts, and it will cut stuff. But that's not what we're here for, realistically. And Damascus is definitely one of those things. You can get stuff that looks a lot like Damascus, and you can tell all your friends you got this beautiful Damascus knife. But realistically, there's a massive difference between Damascus and Damascus. So to give you an idea, I've recently made a few nice folding knives which have got stainless steel Damascus blades on them. And again, Damascus comes in high carbon steel, and it comes in stainless steel, and you can get any variety of steels in your Damascus. It's something that a lot of, like 90% of people out there never give it a second thought. They just think it's Damascus steel, it must be great because it's heralded as this fictitious thing that came from the past that was, you know, better than dragon glass, you know. But realistically, it's only the sum of whatever it's made of. Now, traditionally, Damascus steel was one piece of steel, for example, a piece of steel that was heated up, folded, heated up, folded, heated up, folded, and it was just that one piece of steel in there. But you would maybe get some little visual lines where you could see the weld marks where each one of those was joining the next one. These days, that steel is something different. They basically pattern weld it, so they take deliberately two different types of steel, one which will be more silvery, one which will be more grey or black, and then they stack them up, literally one and another one. They'll cut another bit of this, put it on the top, and they'll stack them up into a giant stack, and then heat them up and forge weld that together, so you get all those beautiful layers of laminations. And then they might take that stack and fold it again, and you can Google it now, you can find million layer Damascus and stuff like that, or Damascus made out of screws or chainsaw blades, etc. However, unless you know where that Damascus came from, you don't know what it was made of. Whether it was made from old hubcaps and old frying pans, or whether it was made from some of the finest high-grade knife steel that's available. Because again, the process of making Damascus is not cheap. You know, even if you just look at the cost of the propane involved with some of the guys that do it, they spend a fortune just to make a billet. And all that cost obviously gets passed on. So as I get back to it, my line in the sand is I'm only going to use Damascus that's been made by reputable companies, so I know exactly what I'm getting, and therefore you know what you're getting when you order a knife from me. And to give you an idea, this is a piece of Dana steel. Again, look them up on the interweb, German company, and they will make their steels and they'll tell you exactly what they used in each layer, and you can guarantee that each one of the steels used in each layer on its own would make a fantastic knife. And again, they all sorts of beautiful patterns. However, as an example, a piece of steel that was originally this long, which is probably less than 20 centimeters, will cost me to buy about £100. So when people then say, I want this beautiful knife made from that beautiful steel, instantly you get an idea of where the prices are going, and this isn't necessarily the most expensive, depending on the patterns that you want, whether you want stainless steel or high carbon steel. With that, I'm basically happy to quote everybody on an individual basis as to what I can do a Damascus knife for. In the future, I may well look to work with another artisan that makes their own Damascus, in which case we might be able to get slightly better prices. But again, each piece is unique, and I'm only interested in working with decent quality. Other than that, another look at stainless steels is basically powder metallurgy stainless steel. So a lot of regular stainless steel and high carbon steel is made in an ingot process where they basically get a big crucible, they throw a whole load of different bits of steel in there, carbon, manganese, iron, etc. And then they give it a stir, and then they pour it into a block, and then they roll that flat, and there's your steel. And in the same way you would do that to make a cake, you throw all your ingredients in a bowl, mix them up, put it in your cake tin, and voila, there's your cake. They don't always mix very well. So again, the companies where you buy your steel from and what brand of steel that is makes a big difference. And again, I've only ever used steels from reputable manufacturers. You can buy some steels far cheaper, but it doesn't come with a brand name on it. It's just, here is some steel. And again, you can't be surprised when you forge that steel and you polish it out and you find funny looking marks in the steel that shouldn't be there. That again, that steel may not have come from the greatest manufacturer of steel. And moving on from that, there's a whole other process which is called powder metallurgy, which is where they basically make steel, as it sounds, from powder. So they take, rather than pouring everything into a big mixing vat and pouring it out, they literally take a fine dusting of every ingredient that goes in that steel and lay it out and effectively sinter it all together so that the grain in that steel is even throughout. And you're probably sitting there thinking, bloody hell, this is like, who cares, you know? But realistically, if you're looking for a really, 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 really good knife, you should care, because that is what makes a difference. You probably maybe experienced it if you're keen into your knife sharpening, that you sat there and you've been sharpening your knife and you get the burr along the edge of it, and you'll find bits flake off, or when you start using your knife and you're cutting through a piece of paper and it's tearing in a particular spots and things, the chances are that is entirely due to where the hard bits and the soft bits in your blade are. And again, it's taking it to the extreme level, but the long and the short of it is ingot steels will always have tiny hard bits, tiny soft bits next to each other, and the joins inside the steel between the hard bits and the soft bits are not as strong as a join made from a powder metallurgy steel, where you get much finer cutting. You can get exactly the same steel made to the same recipe, but from two different manufacturing processes, and those two steels will give you completely differing results. So far as the one that's powder metallurgy will hold an edge better, will be tougher because the bonds between each little grain of carbide is stronger, and of course those steels do cost a little bit more. However, when you're looking for the ultimate in a nice sharp knife, things like, for example, LMAX, RWL 34, M390, 154 CPM, they're all, you know, absolutely fantastic and as good as you can get. However, that's not to say that the other steels aren't good too, but it's kind of a ever diminishing returns sort of scenario where the best knives in the world are obviously more expensive, and they cost more because when you get the best steel in the world, it doesn't want to grind easily, and you know, it all adds up. I think that's about it, really. We've got lots more building work going on that I alluded to last time. We've got a guy coming in with an excavator to dig around the outside of our house sometime the next week. And once that's done, then we can get on with more of the works inside here once the floors are dry and watertight. But there's probably going to be a whole nother video just about what's going on there, really. And I think that's about it. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments. If there's more different things that you'd like me to talk about, put them in the comments. Please be kind. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.